I kind of kept working, but I knew something was kind of off with the group. And basically what ended up happening that kind of got me out of that situation or starting to really look at leaving that situation was it started dawning on me through the experiences that I had going around. I started traveling from church to church to church, doing projects. I was being sent out away from Los Angeles and going out to Twin Cities, to Seattle, to Las Vegas. And we were at this point opening up new, refurbished or renovated churches of Scientology. And if you see Scientology in the news, that's probably what you're seeing, is press releases or notices about how they bought a new building, renovated it, and opened it up to great fanfare. And look at how Scientology is expanding like crazy because they had to buy this new building and renovate it and open it with great fanfare. Well, what I saw was I'd go to these openings and there'd be, a couple hundred people there for the opening, maybe if that, however many. And the next day, nobody was there anymore. They all just came for the opening and then and they went back home, or they flew back to whatever town they had flown into town from to see the opening. And the church leader, David Miscavige, would fly into town, cut the ribbon. It was a great big thing. And then the next day, crickets. Nobody was particularly flooding into our churches, and it wasn't really taking off. And I saw this over and over and over again, but then I would see that same leader, David Miscavige, come out at periodic events for Scientologists and tell all the Scientologists how these empty churches were actually full and expanding, and more people were becoming Scientologists than ever before. And we never had millions of members. Total lie. Because I saw for myself, and I was seeing things that other Scientologists weren't necessarily seeing because I was traveling from one place to another to another. So it started dawning on me that I was being told one thing about the group and how it operates, but I was seeing something different. And at first, I tried to tell myself, like kind of anybody would, I think, well, there's reasons, there's justifications, there's excuses, and I tried to rationalize what I was seeing with my own eyes and try to make it make sense. But after about a year or two of this, of traveling around, and finally ending up here in Minnesota, at the church here, over in St. Paul, I opened up that place, 80,000 square feet. Beautiful building, gorgeous. Well, we closed the street, opened it up. David Miscavige flies into town, right? Meet and greet, shaking hands, everything's great. We're gonna blow this place away. He leaves the next day, 80,000 square feet of nothing. There's nothing happening there. Nobody's curious, nobody wants to come in, nobody wants anything to do with Scientology. And I couldn't figure out why. It made no sense to me, because everything I was being told within the group was that this is the best, most expansive, most wonderful thing ever. They kept me here in St. Paul to try to get the place going. And I was working with the staff members, and I was working with the public, and I came to find out that in the 5-state area here, in Minnesota and the states around here, there were about 120 Scientologists who are actively doing Scientology, which is a very different time. Like I literally knew every single one of them by name. I'd met them, I'd gone out to their door and, hi, come on, come back in. And that was my job. And so I couldn't deny it anymore. It was undeniable. This was not what it was being presented to me, as what it was. And there was a tremendous amount of stress on making money. Money, 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 money. So I went, this isn't really what I signed up for. And in 2012, I stopped working for the church. Now, when I was here in Minnesota, I had to go back to LA to leave and do that whole process, divorce my wife, leave the whole thing, and I still believed that there was this method of achieving spiritual freedom through L. Ron Hubbard's techniques. I just thought the organization had somehow been corrupted or had gone off the rails. So I went back to LA, did that, stopped working for the church, and I came back here because I had met someone here that I had fallen in love with and I wanted to be with. And, you know, what other reason would you have for moving to Minnesota? So, so I came back here. Yeah. And everybody knew me, you know, and I thought it was going to be great. Well, then the vindictive side of Scientology started making itself known to me. Because I had dared to leave the church, so to speak. I hadn't totally left. I still wanted to do the services. I was even willing to pay the money to do it. But I was creating bad PR, right? I was a bad image now for the church because I had been a dedicated staff member and Sea Org member, right? The most dedicated and hardcore of the hardcore. And then I had left. And I still wanted to do Scientology. Well, they didn't want me doing Scientology because they thought I was a bad image. And so when I arrived here in Minnesota, they said, you can't go into the church. You can't be on Facebook. Like they wanted to control who I could be friends with on Facebook and who I could be in contact with. Well, that didn't go over so well. You know, a lot of you guys are just seeing me and meeting me for the first time. I'm a talkative guy. I like to interact with people. You know, I like to be social. So it got me wondering, okay, maybe there's something more about this that I don't know. And I got on the internet. Now, the whole time that I had been in the Sea Org, I did not have internet access. I didn't have my own phone because you couldn't have one. I didn't have a line to the outside world. I had never even heard of South Park. It was that bad. So, I didn't know, really, that Tom Cruise was considered a little crazy. We thought Tom Cruise was the bomb diggity man. We thought this guy was like, you know, practically L. Ron Hubbard incarnate, right? Tom Cruise could do no wrong. He was out there speaking the truth. He was out there like pounding the pavement for Scientology. So we just thought, you know, I had no idea how toxic the word Scientology was in the general world because I had been living, and I came to discover that I had been living in a bubble world. I didn't know. No one in the little bubble worlds know that's what they're doing. They think that's reality, you know? And so I thought, I thought all kinds of nutty stuff. And when I got on the internet for real, and I started seeing what is said about Scientology, and then, more importantly, I started reading the testimonials and the stories of people who had been involved just like I had been. Even some people I knew who had left, and I didn't know that they had left, because it wasn't generally talked about. You know, in the bubble world, bad news about the group is censored. It's kept off your lines, is what they call it in Scientology, right? It's off your plate. You don't want to talk about that. You don't want to have dinner conversations about who's left and what they're saying and stuff like that. All that is verboten. Any critical thinking about the organization, any complaining or, you know, maybe something here isn't on the up and up, that gets nipped in the bud right away. You literally get taken into a room and somebody sits down with you and you are told you are not to do that. So I hadn't been exposed to all this information that I was suddenly exposed to. I call it going down the rabbit hole, because for 3 months, I just could not stop reading about all these things I had not known, because these things had been kept from me on purpose. So after 3 months, I found out that L. Ron Hubbard had been married 3 times to 2 women at the same time. Didn't know that. He had kids we didn't know about. I found out that his whole life story within that bubble world was a fantasy, and that the real story was very different. It was not hard to disprove the lies once I saw his college transcripts that he'd flunked out of college. In the world of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard is the guy who attended the first class on atomic and molecular phenomenon, right? In the early 1900s in college, he was one of the first. They have actually gone so far as to say in that bubble world that L. Ron Hubbard was one of the first atomic physicists, that he was a war hero. Well, I came to find out he never saw one day of combat, and in fact got kicked off of the command of the one ship that he ever got command of, because he bombed an island off the coast of Mexico, thinking he was sinking ships or something. I mean, it was that bad. It was like total incompetence. But he had rewritten his own history in the 1950s, way before there was an internet, way before anybody could fact check this stuff. And so his rewritten life story was what we had all bought into. The internet had been the only thing that had come along in the 2000s that had given us the ability to fact check his life story, and finding out that he had told a whole bunch of lies. Pretty bald-faced and bold lies, really. He was a little pathological about it. And I also found out about things that had gone on within the confines of that bubble world, within the confines of the church, that were actually really, really pretty criminal activity. Covering up pedophilia, covering up embezzlement, covering up suicides, that some Scientologists had committed suicide. That had been whitewashed, false stories made up about these things to tell Scientologists what had happened. And Tom Cruise, of course, jumping on Oprah's couch and acting like a general crazy person. Hadn't known about that. Then, of course, I learned about Xenu. Now, that whole story, by the way, within the bubble world, is something that you are told is sacred knowledge, which you have to be at this level. You can't find out about it here, because if you find out about it here, the consequence is that you'll die. That knowledge will kill you. All the way up to the point that I opened up the document and read it. And after I read it, even up to the next day, I was actually a little nervous in the back of my head. I got a little sick the next day, and I was like, oh shit. Like, that's how strong that indoctrination was. I took it seriously. You know, okay, I took Scientology seriously. You know, how many of us take whatever seriously, you know? We all buy into whatever beliefs we buy into. I don't have a problem with buying into beliefs. What I have a problem with is dictatorial control systems, and that's what I'm gonna go into now.